flipping through the newspapers, switching through multiple news channels, exploring different websites and online mediums for relevant news. Keeping up to date with important news is not only time-consuming but also requires meticulous upkeep of notes for thorough revision. With a limited period in hand and abundant resources to study from, do not let current affairs come in the way of your prelims success. Join the PT 365 program by Vision IAS and advance in your preparation for current affairs. Starting on 9th January at 5 p.m., this 20-day course offers comprehensive coverage of 1 year of current affairs in 60 hours. Join for improved knowledge with complete coverage of The Hindu, Indian Express, PIB, Economic Times, Yojana, Economic Survey, etc. Doubt-clearing sessions and mentoring for thorough knowledge. Access to Sandhan personalized test with 25,000 plus questions. Access to live and online classes for flexibility in timing. It's time to devote your energy to smart learning and not running. Enroll today and excel in UPSC prelims with a strong command of current affairs.
Hello and welcome to this edition of News Today. Before we begin, let's take a look at the headlines first. Use of loudspeakers not an essential religious practice, says Bombay High Court. Indonesian President honored as chief guest at India's 76th Republic Day celebration. Ministry of Finance notifies the operationalization of the Unified Pension Scheme. Indore and Udaipur join the list of 31 wetland accredited cities in world. Earth's magnetic North Pole is shifting towards Siberia, according to updated World Magnetic Model. International Union for Conservation of Nature's released Guidance on Other Effective Area-Based Conservation Measures report. In the first news for the day, let's talk about a significant ruling by the Bombay High Court that has sparked discussions on the intersection of religion and public order. Recently, the Bombay High Court reiterated its 2016 judgment in the Mahesh Vijay case, where it categorically held that the use of loudspeakers is not an essential part of any religion. To substantiate this stance, the court referred to the Supreme Court's judgment in the Church of God case of 2000. The Apex Court had ruled that there is no fundamental right to use loudspeakers under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A and Article 25. Essential Religious Practices or ERP is employed by Indian judiciary for the adjudication of matters of freedom of religion and determining whether essentiality of that religion practice. Now, how do courts decide what constitutes an essential part of religion? For that, they employ the Essential Religious Practices or ERP test. Let's delve deeper into the ERP test. This test was introduced by the Supreme Court in the Sri Sharur Mutt case of 1954. The landmark judgment extended the scope of freedom of religion by including religious practices under its ambit. The court held that determining what constitutes an essential part of a religion must primarily be based on the doctrines of that religion itself. Over the years, various judgments have added nuances to this principle. For instance, in the Sri Adi Visheshwara case of 1997, the Supreme Court distinguished between the religious and secular functions of temples. Then, in the Acharya Jagdisharananda case of 2004, the court emphasized that a practice forms an essential part of a religion only if its absence would fundamentally alter the religion. More recently, the Shaira Bano case of 2017 brought significant clarity. Here, the court held that the practice of triple talaq was against the basic tenets of Islam. It also observed that merely being permitted or not explicitly prohibited by a religion does not make a practice essential or a positive tenet sanctioned by religion. To summarize, the Bombay High Court's reiteration reaffirms that while religious freedom is a constitutional right, practices like the use of loudspeakers are not integral to any religion under the Essential Religious Practices test. This ruling highlights that judiciary's role in balancing individual rights, religious freedoms, and public interest. Moving ahead, a historic moment marked India's 76th Republic Day celebrations as the President of Indonesia was honored as the chief guest this year. Interestingly, this is not the first time Indonesia has shared the spotlight on such an occasion. It was also the chief guest country during India's very first Republic Day in 1950. On this significant day, both nations took a major step forward in strengthening bilateral ties. A series of pacts were signed covering maritime security, health, and traditional medicine. Furthermore, India and Indonesia are actively working on a framework agreement for defense cooperation. Key projects include surface-to-surface missiles, air defense systems, and technology transfers for submarine construction. In addition, India warmly welcomed Indonesia's decision to join the coalition for disaster-resilient infrastructure at the earliest. Let's take a closer look at India-Indonesia bilateral relations. Politically, the two nations share a historical connection. Both were part of the Bandung Conference in 1955, which eventually led to the establishment of the Non-Aligned Movement in 1961. On the trade front, their economic partnership is robust, with bilateral trade reaching $29.4 billion in FY 2023-24. In defense, the partnership is further solidified through joint military exercises such as Samudra Shakti and the India-Indonesia Coordinated Patrol. Now, why is Indonesia so significant for India? Economically, Indonesia is India's second largest trading partner in ASEAN. India imports key commodities like coal, palm oil, and rubber, while exporting refined petroleum, telecom equipment, and agricultural products. Geopolitically, both nations are members of prominent groups including BRICS, G20, IORA, and the East Asia Summit. Their respective policies, India's Act East policy and Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, and Indonesia's Global Maritime Fulcrum Vision, align seamlessly, enhancing regional collaboration. Geostrategically, Indonesia's location between the Indian and Pacific Oceans makes it crucial for India's Sagar initiative. Access to the Sabang port further secures trade through the Malacca Strait and aids in counterbalancing China's influence in the Indo-Pacific region. And finally, on the cultural front, the shared heritage between the two nations is remarkable. Indonesian culture is deeply influenced by Hinduism, with epics like the Ramayana and Mahabharata playing a vital role in its art and folklore, fostering strong people-to-people ties. This Republic Day celebration truly reflects the deep-rooted and multifaceted partnership between India and Indonesia. With strong historical ties, growing trade, and aligned geopolitical visions, the bond between the two nations is poised to scale new heights. Moving ahead, in an important development, the Ministry of Finance has notified the operationalization of the Unified Pension Scheme, or UPS. This scheme will be applicable to central government employees who are covered under the National Pension Scheme, or NPS, and opt for this scheme. The UPS will come into effect from April 1, 2025, and the Pension Fund Regulatory and Development Authority, or PFRDA, may issue further regulations for its implementation. Now, let's take a look at the key features of the Unified Pension Scheme. First, the assured pension under UPS will be 50% of the average basic pay drawn during the last 12 months prior to superannuation, provided the employee has a minimum qualifying service of 25 years. For employees with a lesser service period, the pension will be proportionate with a minimum requirement of 10 years of service. In addition to the pension, there is an assured family pension. This will be 60% of the employee's pension immediately before their demise. To further ensure security, the scheme includes an assured minimum pension of Rs 10,000 per month upon superannuation after at least 10 years of service. The UPS also accounts for inflation, as there will be an inflation indexation applicable to the assured pension, family pension, and minimum pension. Additionally, a DNS relief will be based on All India Consumer Price Index for industrial workers, similar to what is applied to service employees. Furthermore, employees will receive a lump sum payment at the time of superannuation, which will be in addition to the gratuity. The lump sum will be equivalent to 1/10 of the monthly emoluments, pay plus DA, for every completed 6 months of service. Now, let's briefly compare the UPS with the existing National Pension Scheme, or NPS, and the Old Pension Scheme, or OPS, to understand the differences. Under the UPS, it is applicable to all central government employees under NPS, while the NPS is mandatory for employees except the armed forces who joined after 2004. On the other hand, the OPS is applicable to government employees both at the center and in the states. When it comes to assured pension, the UPS provides 50% of the average basic pay of the last 12 months. The NPS, however, does not offer a fixed pension but provides market-linked returns. The OPS, similar to UPS, assures 50% of the last drawn salary. The employee contribution to the UPS and NPS is set at 10% of the salary, whereas the UPS requires no contribution from the employee. In terms of lump sum payment, the UPS provides a lump sum amount on superannuation, while the NPS allows for the withdrawal of 60% of the NPS corpus as a lump sum. The OPS, however, permits the commutation of 40% of the pension as a lump sum. In a significant development, Indore and Udaipur have been added to the list of 31 wetland accredited cities worldwide under the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. This makes them the first two Indian cities to achieve this remarkable feat. Let's take a closer look at these cities and their wetland credentials. Indore's Sirpur Lake, a designated Ramsar site, has been recognized for its role as a congregation site for water birds. It is currently being developed as a bird sanctuary. On the other hand, Udaipur, often called the City of Lakes, is surrounded by 5 major wetlands: Pichola, Fateh Sagar, Rang Sagar, Swarup Sagar and Dudh Talai, all contributing to its unique landscape and biodiversity. Now, what exactly is the Wetland City Accreditation, or WCA? This is a voluntary accreditation system approved at COP12 of the Ramsar Convention in Uruguay in 2015. It allows cities that value their natural or human-made wetlands to gain international recognition and positive publicity for their efforts. The accreditation is valid for 6 years, after which it must be renewed, provided the city continues to meet the 6 established criteria. Speaking of criteria, the 6 standards for WCA enlistment include the presence of Ramsar sites providing ecosystem services within city jurisdiction, adopting measures for wetland conservation and ecosystem services protection, implementing wetland restoration and/or management measures, integrating wetland planning into urban land use decisions, promoting public awareness and local participation in wetland decisions, and establishing a local committee for wetland management and Ramsar accreditation. Moving on, let's understand the significance of this accreditation. WCA aims to promote the conservation and wise use of urban and peri-urban wetlands while ensuring sustainable socio-economic benefits for local populations. It encourages cities near and dependent on wetlands, especially those designated as wetlands of international importance, to strengthen their positive relationships with these vital ecosystems. Additionally, the accreditation aligns with India's Amrit Dharohar initiative under the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Finally, a quick overview of the Ramsar Convention itself. This is an intergovernmental treaty that provides a framework for the conservation and wise use of wetlands and their resources. Adopted in 1971, the treaty came into force in 1975. India currently boasts 85 Ramsar sites, a testament to the country's commitment to wetland conservation. To conclude, the inclusion of Indore and Udaipur in the wetland accredited cities list is a milestone worth celebrating. It not only brings global recognition to these cities, but also underscores the importance of wetlands in sustaining urban and peri-urban ecosystems. Now, let's delve into a significant update about Earth's magnetic field that could affect everything, from navigation systems to migratory species. Earth's magnetic North Pole is shifting towards Siberia, according to the updated World Magnetic Model, or WMM. The World Magnetic Model, or WMM, is the standard for navigation, attitude, and heading referencing systems that rely on the Earth's geomagnetic field. Every 5 years, a new version of this model is released to account for changes in Earth's magnetic field. The updated WMM is produced by the United States National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, or NGA, and the United Kingdom's Defense Geographic Center, or DGC. One of the key aspects of the latest update highlights a major shift in Earth's magnetic North Pole. Now, what exactly is this? Magnetic North is where Earth's magnetic field lines enter the planet in the north, while geographic north is where the lines of longitude converge. Earth rotates around the geographic poles, but it is the magnetic poles that have been shifting over time. Since its discovery in 1831 by explorer James Clark Ross, the Earth's magnetic North Pole has gradually shifted. Over the past century, this movement, originally from Canada, has been heading towards Siberia, Russia. In the 2000s, it was recorded that the pole was moving at a rate of about 31 miles annually. However, in the last 5 years, that movement has slowed down. It's important to note that the positions of the Earth's magnetic north and south poles constantly change as Earth's magnetic field varies over time. Another factor that changes over time is the magnetic declination, or the angle between magnetic north and geographic north at different locations. Sometimes Earth's magnetic poles even undergo a pole reversal, where the magnetic north and south poles swap places. This has happened 183 times in the last 83 million years according to the paleomagnetic records. Now, what does this all mean for us? Well, there are several potential implications. The shifting magnetic pole can lead to errors in navigation systems, which rely on the accuracy of the magnetic field. It could also impact migratory species that use Earth's magnetic field for navigation. Moreover, the shifting magnetic field poses risks for satellite and power grids, especially in relation to solar storms. In conclusion, the shifting of Earth's magnetic North Pole is a natural and ongoing process, with potential consequences for navigation, wildlife, and infrastructure. As we continue to monitor these changes, staying informed will help us better understand and mitigate their impact. Now, let's delve into the International Union for Conservation of Nature's recently released Guidance on Other Effective Area-Based Conservation Measures, or OECM's report. This report provides crucial guidance on conserving land, water, and coastal areas through the innovative tool of OECMs. First, let's understand what OECMs are. The term OECMs first appeared in 2010 within the Aichi biodiversity targets established by the Convention on Biological Diversity, or CBD. Later, at COP14 in 2018, the CBD adopted an official definition for OECMs. So, what exactly are OECMs? They are geographically defined areas distinct from protected areas, or PAs. These areas are governed or managed to achieve sustained long-term outcomes for the in-situ conservation of biodiversity. Additionally, they safeguard associated ecosystem functions and services and, where applicable, preserve cultural, spiritual, socio-economic, and other locally relevant values. Importantly, areas already designated as PAs or those lying within PAs should not also be identified or reported as OECMs. Moving on, OECMs are pivotal for achieving Target 3 of the Global Biodiversity Framework. This target aims to conserve at least 30% of terrestrial, inland waters, and coastal and marine areas by 2030. Notably, OECMs can be governed by various entities, including government agencies, private groups such as NGOs, indigenous peoples, local communities, or even through shared governance arrangements. Next, let's explore the significance of OECMs. These areas play a vital role in conserving important ecosystems, habitats, and wildlife corridors. They contribute to the restoration of degraded agricultural, forest, and pasture lands while supporting the recovery of threatened species. Furthermore, OECMs help maintain ecosystem functions and secure ecosystem services, including rejuvenation of springs and water bodies, aquifers, and improving the groundwater table. They also promote agrobiodiversity conservation, which leads to enhanced food and nutritional security. Additionally, these areas enhance resilience against threats and facilitate the retention and connection of remnants of fragmented ecosystems within developed landscapes. Now, let's address how OECMs differ from protected areas, or PAs. Protected areas are managed with the primary objective of biodiversity conservation within a specific site, such as preserving habitats for endangered species. On the other hand, OECMs can be managed for various objectives, such as protecting areas of cultural or historical importance while still delivering conservation outcomes. To sum up, the IUCN's guidance on OECMs provides an invaluable framework for conservation. By leveraging OECMs alongside protected areas, we can accelerate efforts to meet global biodiversity targets and ensure a sustainable future for our planet. In today's Place in News, we will be discussing Georgia with its capital Tbilisi. Recently, Georgia has been certified as malaria-free by the World Health Organization. Now, let's take a look at Georgia's political and geographical features. Georgia is located in the Transcaucasia region at the intersection of Eastern Europe and West Asia. It shares borders with Russia to the north and northeast, Azerbaijan to the east and southeast, and Armenia and Turkey to the south. To the west, Georgia is bordered by the Black Sea. Geographically, Georgia is home to remarkable natural features. The country's highest point is Mount Shikhra, standing at 5,068 meters. It also boasts the Greater Caucasus and Lesser Caucasus mountain ranges, which are significant landmarks. In terms of rivers, Georgia is traversed by major ones like Inguri, Rioni, Imtiquiri, and Kodori. However, the country also faces challenges in its conflict regions, including Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and Ajaria. As we conclude today's main news, let's have a look at some quick updates. State Bank of India released a report on India's investment and external commercial borrowings landscape. The key observations include that household net financial savings improved to 5.3% of GDP in FY24, up from 5.0% in FY23. Additionally, savings in physical assets increased from 12.9% of GDP in FY23 to 13.5% in FY24. As per a study, the continued use of nano-urea could reduce the yields of rice and wheat. Nano-urea, developed by the Indian Farmers Fertilizer Cooperative, is an innovative agricultural input based on nanotechnology that provides nitrogen to plants. It contains 4% nitrogen and has a small size, offering more surface area and a higher number of particles per unit area than conventional urea. The Karnataka High Court struck down the Electricity Promoting Renewable Energy through Green Energy Open Access Rules 2022. The court noted that the centre had no powers to frame these specific rules and that the relevant commission at the state level was authorized to regulate open access. Researchers conducted a genetic survey of cyanobacteria in Lake Victoria's Wenham Gulf, which is the second largest freshwater lake in the world after Lake Superior in the US and the largest in Africa. The lake borders 3 countries, Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya. Cyanobacteria or blue-green algae are photosynthetic microorganisms found in aquatic habitats. As per the Ministry of Education, PM Shri schools have witnessed around a 76% rise in student enrollment across 5 states: Manipur, Tripura, Rajasthan, Meghalaya, and Madhya Pradesh. The PM Shri scheme, which is aligned with the NEP 2020, is a centrally sponsored scheme launched in 2022. Its duration is 5 years, from 2022-23 to 2026-27. The US is considering a 10% tariff on Chinese imports because fentanyl is being smuggled from China into the US through Mexico and Canada. Fentanyl is a powerful synthetic opioid approved by the Food and Drug Administration for analgesic, pain relief, and anesthesia purposes. It is approximately 100 times more potent than morphine and 50 times more potent than heroin as an analgesic. The Ministry of Home Affairs announced the Padma Awards 2025 on Republic Day. The Padma Awards, instituted in 1954, are among the highest civilian awards of the country. They are conferred by the President at Rashtrapati Bhavan in 3 categories: Padma Vibhushan, Padma Bhushan, and Padma Shri. Etikopaka dolls were showcased at the President's reception for Republic Day. Originating from Etikopaka, Andhra Pradesh, these dolls represent a 400-year-old craft. They were officially recognized with a geographical indication GI tag in 2017. Made from the wood of the Anukodu tree, which is known for the lightweight and smooth texture, these dolls do not contain any heavy metals or toxic materials. Before we sign off, let's challenge your understanding in today's installment of Test Your Learning. Thank you for joining us. We hope you found this episode of News Today engaging. For the solutions to the quiz and to access the PDF version of News Today, remember to visit the provided links in the description below.